Hello and welcome to Ivycreates by Deanna Carroll. I'm glad you're here and thank you for watching. Today we're going to be painting an amazingly easy bayou scene, bayou sunset. Everybody loves sunsets, so the first thing that I did, I thought the camera was on and it wasn't, but anyways, I took my little piece of canvas board and I put a darker yellow about 2/3 on the bottom and used a lighter yellow 1/3 on the top. So then I took white and I made a whited out sun. I made some puffy clouds, and the puffy clouds are just dabbing, and you start with you kind of make them like a puffy in the middle and then you elongate them out, and the reflection on the what is going to be the water you put just back and forth in the center under the sun. Some white very lightly on the brush. It can be a dry brush or hold on one second. So here you can see me adding a peach color to the sun, and I also added it to the water below, just kind of a back and forth, and then I'm going back and adding a little bit of white here and there, and this is a representation of just like the highlights on the water of where the sun reflects. And what that does, and you'll see me also adding a little bit of the darker yellow, the same that I used on the bottom, at the very top and right up underneath the clouds. That is to give it more dimension and make it look like, you know how when you have a sunset you have the darker sky and then you have the darker water reflections. So with that is you see I'm going to use a small little narrow brush. The rest of the time I've just been using just your basic brush. It can be flat, it can be curved. It's not a big deal. It's your brush of choice. So this is going to be even a different color of like a orangey color, and it's going to be light. And keep it in mind, the sun is your direction of light. That is where your light is coming from. So you want to have things that are closer to the sun be kind of faded out in color. They might be not detailed. They're not going to be very dark. They're going to be right, close to where the sun is. So you want something that's going to be close to the colors that are in the background. So I'm using a pale orangey color to kind of make the semblance of trees. And I'm just following shapes. And when I'm done following the shapes, I pull down some color into the water straight down, and then just barely, very, very lightly run my brush across to give it a little bit of back and forth motion and to soften it some. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. Here is I'm going to make something that kind of looks like a tree but is not perfect, and all I'm doing is dabbing very lightly on this on the paper, just to give it the shape of a tree. So I'm just dabbing little, because you're not really going to see much. And also you can give the illusion of moss or hanging down items in the far background if you pull down with the brush as well. So what we want to do on our water line here is we want to make sure that we pull some of the color down into the water, because what that is that's the back side of what the sun is seeing, and so it'll be shaded. So the other side of the trees and bushes would be what would be highlighted by the sun, and this is the back side. So it's bright enough back there that it's going to be the lighter orange, but it's also dark enough that it's going to show a reflection in the water based on the fact that the sun is the light source. So sorry about that, y'all. I totally did not remember that I turned my camera around. So this is going to be our next thing that we're going to do. It's just a boat. Now on a boat, you're going to make the pointed end, the front end, whichever the end is, the higher point, and the rear end is going to be the lower point. So you're going to do it kind of a curve, and you're going to curve that, and then you're going to sitting it flat on the water. So you want to use your horizon line. And so I'm doing that out of a pumpkin orange color, and this is just a little cabin here, and it'll have a roof on it and everything, and this is just going to sit in our bayou back in there for the evening or what have you. And so this is a pumpkin color on the canvas, and now I'm going to do the reflection below the boat. So I want to give it a general shape to whatever you want, and in the reflections you do want to water your paint down, make it thinner. The thinner the better. When you're doing clouds, you want to kind of have thick paints, but when you're doing reflections, you want to have thin paint. So that way you can smooth it out and give it a softer look, but you can still get the color that's in the water. So the next thing I want to do is add a little bit more depth to it and add a little bit of shading to the boat. So this again is the back side, not the sun facing side. So we're going to add some darkness into it with some brown and some black, which is burnt umber. And I'm using my Americana paints on this canvas board, and those are going to be my burnt umber colors, and I'm adding some black and some brown in, and that way I've got some more shaded sides, and you can see there, and it's got a little bit of a reflection down in the water as well. So now I'm going to pull out a different color. Let's see, it's going to be, I believe, the white there. I'm just going to touch up a little bit because I think I've gotten some paint splatter up on the top, which is perfectly fine. Now this here, where you see that, that's the water line. And you want to run the water, you want to have that the white to be either thin or super thick, depending on which way you want to do it. You can do one or the other. But I prefer to do a thin water line. Thin, what I mean by that is thin paint. You want to have very thin paint, and you want to run the water line, which is the white, right up under and over the reflection. That way that it shows the difference, and it shows a break in the water. So you might end up with your little waves a bit. Now this is going to be our first tree, our first big close-up tree. And the close-up trees, I'm using the burnt umber, and I love burnt umber because when you thin it out, and you can thin it with water or whatever you want to use, or you can add black to it, or whichever way, but when you thin it, it gives it, it's just like almost like a stain, and it's a very good tree color. So most of the time I like to do swamp scenes and do things that are in the bayou kind of looking, or cypress trees. Those are cypress trees, and live oaks are my favorites, and they are regional to our southern heritage. And so I'll do a lot of that. I've spent a lot of time in the Atchafalaya swamp over in Louisiana, close to Lafayette, and I've spent a lot of time. That's my church. That's my heaven. I love my swamps, and I have a lot of swamps around me, so it's a good place to be. So anyways, I'm using the burnt umber, and I'm just adding more to my tree. And the classic way to do this is you want to make a wider base, and you want to come up and branch out. And as you do that, I'm using a wide flat brush right now, and you want to extend it out, and you can see just by the motions of the brush that it is it's actually adding the light and the darks to the tree. And you want to wiggle your brush as you go. You just kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit to give it a not so perfect straight line. You don't want perfect straight lines. So and generally you want branches that go up and then come a little bit down again. As you can see by that top branch that's hanging over, it goes up and then it kind of hangs down a little bit, because we are putting Spanish moss on here later on, and we do want that to hang down. Now if you've got a big dark hole in your tree, you can, or maybe the center is out, you can put some blacks and add some different depth into that. So the trees are a whole process. You want to kind of feel which direction they go, and they can't be perfect. They've all got to have their own character, and you know, nobody is interested in seeing lollipop trees. So nobody tells stories about lollipop trees. They tell stories about big old trees that have character, and so that's what you want to do. Now I like to always include some of the broken trees and things that might have grown differently, and you see there that I wiped a little bit of that reflection off with my napkin. And you can also, I use my fingers a lot to soak up too much paint when I have too much and I don't like the way it looks. So I honestly don't know how Bob Ross does everything he does in such a short period of time. It's this does take a while. Now I will say the beauty of his type of work is that he really doesn't include a ton of detail. So he can make a very quick landscape photo, and in an hour or so or less, and because he doesn't include minute details, he gives an overall look, and that's kind of what we have here, is an overall look. Now when you're doing your own, you could go back and add buildings, you can add individual flowers or different things like that. Now the next thing to notice is, you notice when I was back in the far back doing that water line back by the sun, that I had that light orange. Then I came up to the boat and it became a pumpkin orange, a little bit darker orange with darker highlights. And as I'm getting even closer, I'm doing more color. There's going to be more color into it and more accurate color. And by the way, please subscribe to my channel. And then there's also going to be brighter color and darker darks and brighter brights, and have more color to it. So it's looking more like what the actual item is, what we're painting. So this is just some dead trees and some little pieces of grass, marshy area that we're painting on this one here. And if you like what you see, please let me know down in the comments below. Please check out my links below this, and subscribe, share, and do all the things. So now I'm just adding in more reflection for the little grasses and the little pieces of tree that I put in. And it can be very simple pieces of tree until you get to know what is best for you to do. So next thing I'm going to do is probably add in a little piece of fence. I like fence. It covers a lot of good space, and you can make it look old and falling apart and all that good stuff. It's not that hard. And so here I am putting the wood across some of the fencing. And I am definitely working hard not to make it perfectly even or level or anything of the sort. You never know how that's going to be. Now where I happen to live, you can have these country type areas very much on the waterfront. In fact, there's a place that I go down to in Waveland area. It's just beyond Waveland, and you can ride through the back roads and you end up on the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of a farm that is cows running and right up to the Gulf of Mexico. And there are very few places on earth that are still, waterfront and still as country as it is on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So, and Louisiana, of course. So, I've got a little piece of fence there, and I put my reflection down in the water. Now I'm going to go back and add my little white areas that to highlight after I use some of the pumpkin in my grass. First I went with the darker brown in the grass, and then I'm adding the pumpkin color to it. so that like I said, you get brighter colors as you come closer towards yourself. So you want to work without having to get too much into perspective. You want to work from back to front. So I started where the sun is, and that was the back of my painting. I started way back there in the sun, and this is how you add the depth and everything. You can see I'm adding a little water line with the white there, and it just instantly pushes it back even further. So I started with the sun. I started with the reflections and the faded, smoked out background, and then I'm coming towards me, and each time I come towards me I add a little bit more and a little bit more in the ways of brightness of color and definition and detail. You know, the details are going to be the ones that are closest to you. There are many things you can do to this. This is a very simple example of something that you could paint in about 30 minutes, 40 minutes maybe. So you can paint these types of things in a very fast time. But the more you add, the more detail you add. Of course, it is going to take a little bit longer, but you could add buildings, you can add other boats, you could add things that are tied up, or and you'll see in a few minutes here where I'm adding more and more. Right now I'm just putting in the pumpkin colored grass, and I'm done with that. So now I'm going to move to our next thing, which is, let's see, I'm putting in some more brown, adding a little bit more, darker colors into my grassy area. And you can see these trees, they're super simple. It's really just wiggling your brush while you're laying down paint. That's all there is to it. And that's the main technique. And then you're going to have your branches go up a little, wiggle out, and then go down. So the branches will hang. And again, there's a reminder, please subscribe and please check out the links that are below and visit my Facebook. So I'm just adding more branches to our tree. This is our main tree here, and everything changes as you do it. It all changes. You could add a lighthouse in the background. You could have a cabin way off back there in the woods. You could have different kinds of boats. There's all kinds of goodies. Now I'm going to be adding a closer up fence, and these are just pieces of a fence. And in many cases, I mean, you do not want the fence to look perfect, because you don't want it to be as if, nothing in nature is perfect. So a fence is going to weather over time, and it's going to change and move, and especially on the bayou where the ground is always changing and moving. Now here's the dock that I've got right here, and the dock I just started wide at the base of the painting. I start wider there, and then I go out to a narrow point at the end of the dock. Now I'm adding little there's a post in the water for the dock to stand on, and I'm adding more to our fencing. All right, now I'm going to go across it. And as you're looking, things can change in a picture, or even in a painting. Things change, your mind changes, and you might want to add. And the thing about art is it's supposed to be different. It's not supposed to be exact. It doesn't have to be photorealistic. It can be anything you want it to be, and that is the fun of it, is that, if you don't like it, paint over it. Paint something new. If you don't like it, you can add more and do different things to make it your own. I'm just adding some black for shading towards the back here, since we are getting closer to it's getting closer to us you know, the everything back here is further away from the sun. So it is going to be a little bit darker and a little bit brighter as far as colors go. And you can see how that adds your depth and places things in the background and creates perspective, even though for me perspective it can be confusing sometimes. But if you think about it as in, you know, I'm going to start in the back of the room and I'm going to work to the front door of the room, then it's usually easier that way. And as things go away from you, they're going to be smaller and they're going to be vaguer looking. I don't even know if that's a word. But, and as they come closer to you, they're going to be stronger and bigger and brighter and bolder colors and more definition. So now I'm adding highlights to my little fence here. And what I'm doing, because I did apply a lot of paint on there, is I'm actually wiping some paint off to give it a more wood look. And there's always different things that you can do. Now you see this bright yellow that I'm using, it's a very thick paint. And I'm just highlighting what would be the wood slats on the deck or dock as you go out toward the end, because there's going to be more of a reflection from the sun going on to that area. Alright, I'm also taking some of this yellow and I'm highlighting the edge towards the sun, because that's where our light is. Now the back side, which would be the left side of the canvas, that is going to be darker, and the right side that faces the sun is going to be lighter. So I'm just highlighting the edge, and I'm using a small narrow liner brush so that it creates some texture as it comes down. Looks like the wood, you know, is just, it's got highs and lows, and that's what you want. So I'm adding the yellow as the highlight in the different areas along the painting. Now I have different kinds of paintings like this. I have ones with houseboats on them. I've done a lot of different things. I've done them with alligators and with birds and you know, everything you could imagine. It just depends on what you want. This is all about you. Alright, you can see I've added highlights to the tops of the fence and the tops of the fence post. And this is a thicker paint. Now this, because I am using acrylics, acrylics do dry very quickly. So I did a lot of things, you know, I can use thicks and thins intermittently, unlike if you were doing an oil paint. If you were doing an oil paint, you're going to do one to the other, meaning you have to do all thin until it gets to all thick, or the opposite. Preferably it's the all thin that goes in the background to the thicker paint that comes in the foreground. It just depends on what you're doing. And y'all, I'm sorry for this. I thought I had cut all those out, but I forgot that I turned my camera around. So anyways, you can get an idea of what's going on, see it a little bit better now. Now I looked at this and decided, well, I felt it was too off balance, and so I wanted to balance it out some more. And so what I ended up doing was adding another tree to it. And like I said, you can do anything you want to do, but first I added some green, and I wanted to add the, you know, like I said, the colors closer or bolder. So I put like an army green, and to make it brighter. So now I've got my brown grasses and my orangey grasses, and now I'm adding my green grasses. Some of the photos that I do, the paintings, I'll put in the lily pads and the lily flowers, because back in a bayou you would typically have lily pads and flowers. I was at my friend's farm today, and she has a farm on the Chuticabuff River, 60 acres in the middle of city of Biloxi, and it's all on the Chuticabuff River. Now she has a problem because she has 3 alligators that have appeared in her ponds. Now granted, she lives on the river, but every once in a while an alligator will make it up and into her ponds. And so 3 alligators she has, so now I've got to find an alligator hunter for her. So we're going to work on that and getting rid of those alligators, because she also has about 30 or 40 sheep and several cows that would not be there much longer if the alligators were. So we're going to have to rehome those alligators. Alright, so now I added my green color, and I'm going to go back in with I think I went with a wider, I might have gone with a small liner brush at first. And I'm just going to go up from there and find where my tree is going to be. And it is a matter of feeling. You know, wide, low legs come down. And the further you get up, the thinner the branches are. And they move. You know, they don't have to be, you can't make lollipop trees. They got to have character. So I'm just adding the bases of my tree, and as I come down I'm pulling it out as if it had legs or feet laying across the ground. And this even further sets it into the background, balances out the painting. I'm always careful to make sure that the base of my tree is much wider than the top limbs of my tree. The top limbs actually must be much smaller. That's just the way the trees grow. And another note is that just thinking about Walt Disney. Walt Disney, when he created the castles in the Magic Kingdom, and he created the castles to where they were wider at the base and narrower at the top, because it gives the illusion of more height to it. And so you'll notice, you think those castles look enormous, but they're not really. They're just made to look where they're very narrow at the top, so that they look like they're taller than they actually are. So now I'm adding just some little spots. I had opened up some gray, and I'm adding, just dabbing with my liner brush, the least little bit. And this gray paint that I had was thinner than what I would have wanted. I would have wanted thicker to dab with. I really want thick paint. And so I broke out the white, which I know to be thicker, and started dabbing on a little bit more. And this is to make Spanish moss, which is the moss that hangs in our trees down here. It's really beautiful and really graceful, and it's hilarious also because I was recently at a friend in Florida's, and the neighbors across the street had someone come and remove all the Spanish moss from their tree, which is hilarious. They have giant oak trees like we do, and I mean, they're very large oak trees, and they actually paid somebody to come and take all the Spanish moss. I'm like, oh my goodness, you just don't know. That is something that we like around here. Not only that, but they didn't see that the company had left Spanish moss in the very tops of the trees, which meant, because moss grows down, in a few years it'll be covered in moss again. So that was cracking me up. I'm like, there's no telling how much money they spent on that. And I find it amusing because, you know, that was in Florida, and it's just, that's just part of what happens to our trees here in the South. So anyways, I added my bits to all my little bits of white and everything to this, and I'm going to go back to the gray because the white was much thicker. So I'm just going to dab on some more gray to give it the more depth of color, because Spanish moss is actually gray with little tiny bits of white on it. And it's just going to be hanging from the trees. And when I get done, I'm going to take the wide flat brush and I'm going to pull it down just a little bit. The thing is the pressure on the brush. You want to make sure that the pressure is not too hard on the brush so that it's a very light touch, and just a flat brush that's dried off there. And you're just going to barely touch it when you pull it down, and that is to give it that downward motion of the Spanish moss. Now there are many different ways to do Spanish moss, and I mean I've seen people painting the individual, because it's really curly, so I've seen people painting the individual curls and everything, but I just prefer this method. It's much faster for me. So now I'm going back and I'm adding just a little bit of highlight to everything over that I might need more highlight added to, facing the sun. So if you add some white into your bark on your trees and stuff, again, it gives it, I'd already put yellow into the highlight, and it's really difficult to show on the camera here, but I'd already added yellow, so now I'm just adding white, and it just brings out all of those little creases that they have in the wood and in the bark. So we're almost done with our painting. And if you would like me to paint something in particular that you can think of, or a particular scene that you would like, you know, I'm doing what I like to do right now, but I would be glad to try anything that you want me to try as far as painting goes, or a particular craft. I don't have a problem with that either. I've done just about everything under the sun, from attempting to make a cast net, which is a net thrown to catch fish, to I had to learn crocheting, which I'm a left-handed person, and that can be very hard. And I've taught myself to paint. I have a multitude of skills, and I would love to share them. So if there's anything you're like, gee, I really want to learn how to do that, if I can learn it, if I can do it, I can teach it. So please enjoy. I'm glad you're here to watch. I'm thankful for you. And once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be doing a big giveaway day for my subscribers. So please share and like and subscribe to this channel. All right, take a good look at it. Very quick, very easy painting. And remember, this is just a basics of how, you know, just a very basic of how to paint. So you can add more to it as you go. If you have more time, you can go back and add details. I'm just adding a little piece of rope hanging off the fence post here. I could go back and add a number of things. Green bushes, I can add flowers, other boats, whatever you want to do. But you can definitely see how it's been pushed that sun way back in the far back now. I'm just going to put my name on it and call it a day. Thank you for watching Ivycreates. I appreciate it, and I hope you really, really enjoyed this as much as I do. Enjoy painting. I really do love it, painting. And this is, you know, one of my favorites is a sunset painting. There are many different ways to do a sunset painting. I can show you, but this is one of my favorites. And of course, the swamp is my heart, and the bayou, and being on the coast is just my favorite thing to do.